The United States has approved the first deliveries of weapons to Ukraine paid for by NATO allies. This decision was reported by Reuters news agency. This concerns 2 arms deliveries worth $500 million each under a new mechanism, according to which the weapons are financed by European NATO countries. The weapons are provided from American stockpiles, which allows for faster deliveries. The mechanism was launched last month, and this is its first use. European countries have already pledged to allocate about $2 billion to it. Overall, NATO hopes to raise up to $10 billion. The mechanism for purchasing American weapons for Ukrainians had to be developed after Donald Trump came to power, as he insisted on shifting the financial burden of support onto European allies. President of the United States Donald Trump did not answer the question of whether he plans to meet with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in New York next week, during the high-level week of the UN General Assembly, which both leaders will attend. When asked about this, Trump said that Zelensky would have to make a deal and that Europe should stop buying Russian oil. The US president published a corresponding letter appeal to NATO members last week. Since then, this has become a key position in all his public statements regarding the Russian-Ukrainian war. Bloomberg writes that the US is pressuring its partners, demanding the introduction of 100% tariffs for China and India on the purchase of Russian oil, as well as other measures to force Putin to sit down at the negotiating table with Ukraine. Well, he will have to get down to business and make a deal. He will have to make a deal. Zelensky will have to make a deal. And Europe must stop buying oil from Russia. All right, they say they should stop buying oil from Russia. Months of preparation and heightened security measures. Donald Trump arrived in the United Kingdom on a major state visit at the invitation of King Charles III. Ukraine has its own expectations for this visit. President Zelensky hopes that the British Prime Minister will raise the issue of security guarantees for Ukraine. All the details about the visit were gathered by TSN correspondent Oksana Tkachenko. We can confirm that police units have now been reinforced. Patrols on boats are monitoring the waterways and helicopters are preparing to control the airspace. Meanwhile, the mounted cavalry is conducting its final rehearsals. The United Kingdom is preparing for the arrival of American President Donald Trump. The recent murder of a political ally has forced the British to take extra security precautions. This will involve reviewing routes, premises, residences where they will be staying, inspecting any buildings overlooking these areas, lines of sight, and so on. Any possible threat. Such visits are extremely rare. Trump has experience with this. During his previous term, he was received by the now-late Queen Elizabeth II. At that time, videos of the US president violating royal protocol went viral around the world. This time, according to the British BBC, the risks posed by Trump's unpredictable behavior are very high. But in the United Kingdom, everything is refined down to the smallest detail. First, the Trumps will visit the royal family in Windsor. Together, they will visit the grave of Queen Elizabeth II and take part in a banquet. Everything matters here: the seating arrangement, the menu. But the most meticulous preparation went into King Charles III's 7-minute speech. The BBC reports that the text went through several revisions because the monarch, as His Majesty's government hopes, should thoroughly charm the White House host ahead of the important negotiations scheduled for Thursday. The United Kingdom is aiming to gain something strategic and meaningful from this visit. Obviously, there will be many carefully choreographed moments. Britain will focus on things that are known to appeal to Trump: the personal presence of the royal family, and an emphasis on the historical ties between the two countries. Talks with Starmer will concern a new nuclear deal and technological partnership. Additionally, the Prime Minister will try to persuade Trump not to impose tariffs on British steel and aluminum. Another important point is to align their positions on Ukraine. As early as next week during the UN General Assembly, a meeting with Zelensky is possible. This was stated by Secretary of State Rubio.
I hope that Prime Minister Starmer will be able to have a separate conversation about security guarantees from the United States for Ukraine. Before we end the war, I would very much like us to finalize all the agreements. I would like to have a document supported by the United States and all our European partners. This is very important. This will really motivate our military. That is, if we end the war, we want to be protected. For this to happen, we need a clear position from President Trump. Next, we need the ability to purchase any weapons except nuclear ones from the United States. Analysts write that London will be forced to balance between trying to impress the American president and explaining to its citizens why so much state resources are being spent on this. According to the latest polls, he is an extremely unpopular politician in the United Kingdom. Only 16% have a positive opinion of Trump. Oksana Tkachenko, TSN 1+1 Marathon United News.
They are preparing for the day when Ukrainians will be able to return home. The European Union has agreed on a framework for the gradual termination of temporary protection for Ukrainian refugees. The temporary protection regime for our citizens is in effect until March 4th, 2027. Accordingly, the Council of the European Union has approved recommendations for member states regarding the return, reintegration and change of official status for Ukrainians. In particular, Ukrainians will be offered residence permits based on employment, studies, education or family circumstances. Applications for protection will be available to highly qualified workers. EU countries are recommended to develop programs for the return of Ukrainians to their homeland, including allowing so-called familiarization visits to Ukraine. And the rights of temporary protection, for example, regarding housing, medical care and education, should also extend to those Ukrainians who participate in voluntary return programs. EU countries should also conduct information campaigns so that Ukrainian refugees have full access to information. The Truba case. Italy is deporting a Ukrainian man suspected of organizing the explosions on the Nord Stream gas pipelines. He is 49-year-old Serhiy Kuznetsov, who was detained in August in the province of Rimini. He was vacationing there with his family for several days, even though Germany had issued an international warrant for his arrest. The German prosecutor's office believes that he was the one who coordinated the sabotage of the pipelines in the Baltic Sea in September 2022. At that time, the pipelines were damaged by explosives. Gas was no longer being supplied through them. Russia had shut down Nord Stream 1 the day before, and Nord Stream 2 was never launched. According to Italian investigators, the suspect may have been involved in attacks on vessels belonging to the so-called Russian Shadow Fleet in the Mediterranean Sea. After his extradition from Italy, his case will be investigated by a German federal judge. It is preliminarily expected that the charges will be brought in Hamburg. That is also the likely location where the suspect will be held during the investigative detention. Serhiy himself denies the accusations and emphasizes that he was in Ukraine at the time of the sabotage. His Italian lawyer stated that he has filed a complaint with the Court of Cassation due to violations of his client's basic rights. However, the chances of success are considered minimal.
There is a serious risk of violation of fundamental rights in the event of extradition to Germany. We received additional information from Germany, but as is often the case in matters of international cooperation, it contains false information. We have official reports that refute their claims.
Ukrainian defenders have liberated and cleared Pankivka in Donetsk region of enemy troops. Meanwhile, the terrorist army has occupied Hrihorivka and advanced near 4 settlements. According to deep state analysts, this refers to Yampil and Orekov in the Donetsk region, Novoivanivka in Zaporizhzhia and Berezove in Dnipropetrovsk region. In particular, in the village of Yampil, the Russians tried to infiltrate by disguising themselves and posing as civilians. This was reported by the General Staff. It is known that enemy saboteurs were hiding in private houses and basements, using civilians as human shields. However, units of the 11th Army Corps quickly carried out anti-terrorist measures, detected the enemy, blocked them, and neutralized them. Currently, Yampil and the surrounding areas are fully under the control of the Ukrainian army. In total, there were more than 200 combat engagements on the front line over the past day. A quarter of all assault actions were recorded in the Pokrovsk direction. Despite the pressure from the enemy army, the General Staff reports a successful attack on the command posts of the Center Group and the 41st Combined Arms Army of the occupiers operating in the Pokrovsk area. The Ukrainian Defense Forces noted that these strikes significantly disrupt the occupiers' command and control. Royal Air Force aircraft will protect the skies over Poland as part of a NATO mission. The Ministry of Defense reports the deployment of Typhoon fighter jets to Poland. Britain will join forces with Denmark, France and Germany to strengthen NATO's defense on the eastern flank. This move comes after Russian drones entered Polish territory last week. And this is the most serious violation of NATO airspace by Putin to date. The British Prime Minister stated that these aircraft are not just a show of force. They are critically important for deterring Russian aggression, and he reaffirmed the commitment to support Ukraine and continue to put pressure on Putin. Just a few days after Russia's incursion into Polish airspace, there was a violation of Romanian airspace. NATO responded with a mission. Eastern Sentinel, which involves deploying equipment and deterrent forces on the border with Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine.